Well, the death toll is rising in Turkey as a horrific attack on a wedding celebration kills at least 54 people. 22 of those victims were children. And authorities now say they're unsure about the age of the bomber, who may have been an adult or may have been a child as young as 12. So there's some uncertainty about that today. This is police in Iraq have certainty about this. They capture a boy before he can pull off another attack. Images show police officers holding the young boy while two men cut off his explosive belt before taking him into custody. Joining us now for more on the use of children as suicide bombers by terrorists is Brooke Goldstein. She's the director of an award-winning film, The Making of a Martyr, and a human rights attorney. And Brooke, this is exactly what your documentary was about. You took a look at child suicide bombers. What did you find when you were looking into this documentary? What did you find as far as an answer to the question, how does this happen?
Well, you know, we were researching this as far back as 2004, and what we've seen is an increase in the targeting of innocent Muslim children, not just as suicide bombers, but as human shields and as child soldiers. And what we're also witnessing is the total failure of so-called human rights groups, politicized groups like Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, Coalition to Stop the Use of Child Soldiers, that have not released any type of cohesive reports condemning this egregious form of child abuse. Children are extremely impressionable. They are preyed upon by Islamist media that teaches them, you know, through their textbooks, by their television programs. Often their political leaders, religious leaders, and sometimes their own families teach these children to revere shahada, which is martyrdom in Arabic, to seek death over life. And it is a basic violation of these children's human rights.
And Brooke, why does it seem that it's getting worse? Why are the terrorists looking to target these children?
Well, first of all, terrorism by its very nature, they want shock value. The more gruesome the attack, the better. And we see also, for example, terrorists like Boko Haram not only using children, but targeting children's schools to spread fear and terror. Also, children are cheap. For example, the main character of my film, Hussam Abdu, was a 15-year-old physically handicapped, rumored to be mentally handicapped Palestinian boy. He was paid the equivalent of $20 to blow himself up. So being impressionable, being cheap. Also, children are easily kidnapped. They're kidnapping children from madrasas in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and they're using them as pawns in this very cynical battle.
You know, I was looking at the Turkish media, and the Turkish authorities were having some difficulty because they wanted to identify the bomber. This is over the last 24 hours, but they were worried about blaming the child. And now we're getting a report that they're a little uncertain about the suicide bomber. So I'm going to leave that for what it is. Brooke, I have to take a quick commercial break, but you mentioned the ideology of the terrorists and that being so strong and so convincing to young children. I want to talk to you after the break about the ideology of the good guys and how we strengthen our ideology to be more convincing ourselves. So we'll be right back with more with Brooke Goldstein. Back with Brooke Goldstein now, director of an award-winning film, The Making of a Martyr, and a human rights attorney that's focusing on this issue of terrorists using children to do their work. Brooke, you were just telling us that children, it's hard to even say the word, but that children are cheap essentially to terrorists, that they're very impressionable, and they're just inundated with this terrorist ideology on such a daily basis that they become part of the group. And so the big question for us is, how do we combat that?
Well, first of all, we have to stop turning a blind eye to the state-sponsored illegal indoctrination and recruitment of Muslim children towards violence, and we have to call it for what it is: infanticide. The fact that theology is being used to justify this now makes everybody scared to report about it because they're going to be called Islamophobic. And when you have groups like the Council on American Islamic Relations, who has a large proportion of their budget, calling out counterterrorism experts as Islamophobic for reporting on the abuse of Muslim children as suicide bombers, I mean, what does that mean? What then is pro-Muslim? So number one, we have to stop ignoring it, because ignoring it, we send a green light to terrorist groups. Go ahead, continue killing these children with impunity. And that is the real Islamophobia. Number two, we have to stop funding it. The United States is one of the largest donors to UNRWA, the United Nations Relief Works Agency, which is the arm of the UN that provides aid and education to the Palestinian Arabs. Well, did you know that UNRWA runs schools staffed with Hamas terrorists as teachers, that Hamas's youth wing, Al-Qutla al-Islamiyah, recruits directly from UNRWA schools, that UNRWA schools are used as rocket launching pads. You could make the argument that our taxpayer dollars are going towards aiding and abetting the premeditated murder of Arab children because we are teaching them to commit suicide, homicide attacks.
We have actually touched that topic on our show quite a few times as well, as looking at the aid and where we're spending the money. Just quickly, Brooke, you mentioned at the beginning of your interview that groups like Human Rights Watch don't want to come in defense of these children. And of course, we have this terrible story that now we're trying to figure out a little bit more, but it's no secret that ISIS has used children before in terrorist attacks to do horrible things. Why do you feel that these stories just sort of come and go, but that the trend doesn't really stop?
You know, one of the most egregious examples of a politicized human rights group turning a blind eye, and worse actually, is the Coalition to Stop the Use of Child Soldiers. In 2004, at the time that I was filming my movie, interviewing families of child suicide bombers, interviewing children who had been arrested for attempting to blow themselves up, Coalition to Stop the Use of Child Soldiers came out with a report claiming, quote, there is no evidence of the systematic use of Palestinian children in armed violence. So that, to me, is a slap in the face, not just of these children, but of the parents who obviously want to protect their children.
So there's some, as you mentioned, some politics involved. In the meantime, we have these, these horrible stories, and we want to continue to cover it, continue to report on it, but we also want to be able to offer some sort of a solution as well. Brooke, it's nice to have you on the program. We look forward to having you back. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.